5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hello and welcome back to the Tennis Unfiltered Podcast with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. Here to look back at a fine week of tennis and look forward to what might be an even finer week of tennis out in Turin. Very exciting indeed. I've got Calvin Betton here and also George Bellshaw, although he's doing his best to duck out of shot. I assume he's got something better to try. I sometimes have the excuse of an enormous greyhound coming and poking me in the side. What's your excuse, George?
My laptop wasn't plugged in, so I was just awkwardly reaching around to kind of plug it in better.
What listeners and viewers don't know is that we're already running 15 minutes late because George has been fanning around, which doesn't appear to have been his fault, but I'm sort of convinced probably it was. Calvin, technologically perfect today. Why don't you tell me how much you paid for those headphones?
I got 2 pairs for £11.
That is Yorkshire Bargains Central. The cost controller of Tennis Unfiltered likes that decision a lot. Let's not beat around the bush too much today because we've got loads of questions from you guys to get through, as well as loads of news and bits and pieces. I suppose I should start with an apology to avid tennis fan on Twitter who did ask this question last week and... well, frankly, I'm just incompetent, and I wrote it down and everything and forgot to ask it. So, what does Calvin think about the 2024 doubles team changes? Kulhoff, Mektic, Aravalo, Pavic, Mahut, Roger Vasselin, Glasspool, Roger, and then Neil Skupski, currently partnerless. Chance of Salisbury Skupski in 2024? Why would Kulhoff split from Skupski to play with Mektic? Calvin, doubles gossip, the floor is yours.
I think, as with anything, there's not one cover-all answer. I think primarily you've got to remember that, and this happened last time in 2021, because the Olympics were a year later. But players re-team up because they fancy a shot at the Olympics. So if there's somebody who they think they can from their own country, they think they've got a good shot at a gold medal with, then they'll do that, which I suspect is what Mahut and Roger Vasselin have done, because Roger Vasselin's had a very good year with Santiago Gonzalez. But he's teaming up with Mahut. Now, Mahut's success has also been with all of his success. His 5 slams have always been with Pierre Hughes Herbert. And you'd think he would go with that, but I don't think Herbert's going to qualify for the Olympics. And Mahut on himself wouldn't qualify, but there's a rule that if you're in the top 10, you can choose anybody else who is in the top 300. So what has happened is that Roger Vasselin, I assume, has chosen to play with Nico Mahut for the Olympics, and that'd be that reason. I think we'll probably see a couple more of those going round. I don't know. Was it Aravalo and Pavic are playing together?
Yeah.
I don't know what the background to that one is, because Aravalo and Roger have had a good partnership, and they seem to get on really well, but they've gone their separate ways, and Roger is teaming up with Lloyd Glasspool next year. I don't know the story behind either of those two who made the decision on that and that type of thing. I do know that Mate Pavic is held in very high regard as a doubles player by most players, although I do think he's very up and down as well. When his top level is very good, I've seen him play some pretty poor matches this year as well, one of which wasn't against Henry and Julian earlier this year, where he played out of his skin.
I mean, I guess...
Go on, James.
No, the one I was going to ask about is Neil Skupski. He's currently playing ATP World Tour Finals. All right, I mean, there may be reasons to break up with Wes Koolhof, who has now found a new partner in Mektic. But, surely if you're a single doubles player and Neil Skupski's available, you're ringing him up. His phone's going to be buzzing in his bag.
Yeah, as I understand it, that was Koolhof's decision to split that. And from what I'm told, I think it's straight up that apparently Wes Koolhof and Nikola Mektic are best mates. Right. They played together before, and they won the ATP Tour Finals together before. They're the same year. I think they've been best mates for as long as they've played tennis. And the only reason they split last time was because Mektic teamed up with Pavic for the Olympics, and they were the Croatian federation made a huge push to win. They figured they had a real chance at winning a gold medal in the doubles tennis, which they did. And that's why they basically teamed up, and then they were so good for about a year and a half that they just ended up sticking together. But I think it must have been somewhere along the line that they've had a conversation and figured, well, we're best mates. Why are we still not playing with each other? And that's what has led to that. I don't think it's any slight on Neil or anything. But then again, there's different reasons why pairs do split up. I know there's some more pairs splitting up that I don't think have repaired yet. I know Nice and Zielinski have split up, who've had a pretty good year. Although they've had an up and down year, they've made a couple of really big finals, and then not much else other than that. I think three finals they made in big tournaments, and then haven't actually done. They made final of Aussie Open, I know, and I think maybe Monte Carlo or Rome or somewhere, one of the Masters, and they're splitting up as well apparently, and there's just various reasons. Like I know, and I think that the reason of those two are splitting up is that I think that's a personal thing. I don't think they're getting on too well, and I know that Jan Zielinski's a very intense guy, and I think that Hugo Nice probably has struggled with that somewhat, and some players just struggle to hold partners for long term. There's other pairs who split up because it's nothing to do with either pair. It's not. I think some people always think that it's one player always thinks he's better than the other, but it's not that. Sometimes you just kind of reach a point where you think, like, have we kind of maxed out as to what we can do? And even if that is very good, like it might be that you're getting to a lot of big semi-finals and that kind of thing, and when you look at it and think, have we kind of, like, although we're doing very well as we are, we keep hitting the same wall in getting the step further, and do we see as it being something that we can improve on to get over that wall, or is it just a brick wall that we think as a pair, I think we've probably reached our limit of what we can do, and this is it, and if we split up, then one or both of us might have a shot at doing better with somebody else who offers a different profile as a player.
Just to pick up on something that avid tennis fan was asking about, specifically the possibility of Salisbury and Skupski, obviously both Brits, it being an Olympic year. Just kind of from a technical perspective, I mean, is that I don't know which sides they play. Is that a pairing that could work?
They play different sides. Joe plays deuce and Neil plays ad. They've played together in Davis Cup before, and they didn't win. I know that, and I'm not going to go any further than this. I know one of them approached the other one a couple of months back about playing next year, and it was knocked back.
So it seems unlikely.
Well, you never know, because they both were with good partners. They've both had success. So the one who knocked the other one back might have thought, I'm in a really good situation here, and that situation might not be happening next year. So I don't know, because I don't even know what Joe and Rajiv are doing next year.
Well, that's a good point, isn't it? Because they've been together a long time. They get on well. Like they've obviously had a lot of success. Joe seems to have got over. Like Joe seems to be fitter than he has been for a long time. I think that. I mean, I know that pre-US Open, I don't know if this was ever confirmed or whether it was just rumors. There were talk that they wouldn't play together next year, but then they went and won US Open. So I don't know whether that they think, well, this is carrying on working again. I don't know what the situation is with the Olympics. Neil, it's a complicated situation with Britain for the Olympics, because I think Britain is the only country that has more than one player in the top 10. So yeah, you're right. Although actually Joe has slipped outside the top 10. He's 12 at the moment. Okay.
But the rules are that if you're in the top 10, you can choose, as I just said, you can choose anyone inside the top 300. Now, but as you and I discussed a couple of weeks back, James, that's not as straightforward for Great Britain because of the members in the team and that kind of thing. Because I think the most you can have is it 6 or 5 players in your team?
Yeah, it's typically with Olympic stuff, and I'm going to the Olympics next year, and therefore have read a lot of IOC bump. It is not straightforward and not transparent.
Yeah.
It is, you are limited on the number of players you can take across all the draws, which means that they're obviously, if someone wants to double up, then that makes it more difficult.
It strikes me that they probably will play the Olympics together, I would think. Neil and Joe, because it just seems there's a purely because of, if you look at the way that the team has to be set up, that I imagine Norrie's going to go. I think it can be a 5 or a 6 man team. I can't remember, James. While I'm talking, you can maybe find that out from the message you sent me the other week. So if you think that Norrie's definitely going to be in the team, so it's going to be, I think you can have 2 doubles teams but only 4 6-man team in total. So, but I think Britain is going to have Norrie, Evans, Murray, and Draper, who are all going to play. So I think it's a 5-man team in total.
So you can have, this is where it gets complicated. You can have a maximum of 6 men, a maximum of 4 athletes in the singles, a maximum of 2 teams in the men's, and 1 team in the mixed. So in theory, if you had 4 singles in, you could only then have 2 specialist doubles players in. And if you wanted to have 2 teams, you would have to play 2 singles players playing that.
Yeah, so that's the problem where I think it's going to hit, because I know that Andy Murray is going to want to play doubles. I know that Dan Evans is going to want to play doubles.
Absolutely.
So on that basis, then there's a chance that Joe, even if he's in top 10 but ranked below Neil, might not actually get in if Neil chooses to play with somebody else. If Neil chooses a different doubles player to play with.
Because if Andy plays with his brother, for example.
Yeah, or Evo's going to want to play with some. Or Evo, I don't know, I'm saying that, but now I'm thinking that Evo will probably play with Neil.
But I mean, it's kind of fascinating. And I suppose, gun to your head, do you think Neil and Joe are likely to play together next year on the tour?
I honestly, I don't know on that. That's not insight. I know there's a logical reason why they would, and I know there's a logical reason why they wouldn't. I think that it's been put to me before that there's no real energetic leader in that team, that they both, like Joe heavily relies on Rajiv putting the energy into the team and that kind of thing, and Wes Koolhoff's one of the most energetic people on the tour, and he puts that in that Joe and Neil are both pretty laid back. Being that, like I said, I know one of them has approached the other and it was knocked back. It makes me think that it probably won't be a long-term thing on the tour, unless they're looking at it and thinking we've got a serious chance of the Olympics and do the Mektic and Pavic thing. But I honestly don't know, and I don't have any info on it. But it'd be an interesting one, because again, Neil's one of the 4 best doubles players in the world and currently doesn't have a partner for next year. And there's also no obvious, when you look at it and you think who are the obvious ones who he would go with that are not British, there's kind of no one really around.
If you were Neil in that position, I mean, he's played with Dan before a bit, hasn't he? Andy is still Andy, as old as he is, kind of big moments, that kind of mental side of things might be, and that kind of forum might tempt him. Do you think Joe is the obvious pick out of those 3, or what are the kind of merits between them that you'd be factoring in? Tough decision, maybe.
The problem with playing with the singles guys, and I've had this with Henry and Luke, is that when you go to the tournaments, you've got nobody to practice with. And you're having to, as a doubles pair, ideally you want to practice as a pair all the time. It's a team game. It's not just one of you training. So that would be the thing that would put Neil off, I would think. But if Evo wants to play with him, he's going to put a lot of pressure on him to play with him. But I also think that there's a chance Evo might want to play with Andy.
Yeah, I
think Neil will be getting a lot of pressure from different sources, because I think there will be also a lot of pressure from different areas coming for him to go, look, Joe's we can't be leaving Joe without any Olympics here when he's one of the top 10 or 11 players in the world. So you're going to have to play with him.
And let's not beat around the bush here. This will, I think I can say with some certainty, be Andy Murray's last Olympics. It could be, I mean, Evo will be 30, might just have turned 34 by the time this Olympics comes around. 38, is he still going to be around in 4 years' time? Probably not. So for both of them, they're looking at it as like their last Olympics, which they would want to maximise. So yeah, I guess what we've got here, Calvin, is a great like insight and a little microcosm of just how much politics there is involved in doubles, and also in a successful doubles program.
Yeah, there's a lot of politics, but also it's one of those where the nature of the business is basically a lot of backstabbing. And a lot of a lot of talking and going, yeah, let's wait and see. I've been asked by this person, but I don't know. And the nature of entering the tournaments causes that as well, that you don't know who you're getting in with, and you're basically going to have to wait and get in at the last minute and that kind of thing with somebody else. And you've always got backups and that kind of thing. There's a couple of players who are notorious on the tour for just getting good backups all the time. So I know that like there was again, it's lower down the levels. I know that before I coached Henry, although I knew Henry and we knew he was a good player, that Luke and myself were in Portugal at Futures, and Luke was already at this stage was ranked, I think, about 300 in doubles. He was notoriously one of the better doubles players outside of the top 150. And he didn't have this was the first tournament we went to after COVID. So it was the first trip we went on after COVID in Portugal. And Henry was there, and Luke didn't have a partner. And Henry just come out of college, so he didn't have a world ranking at the time. So me and Luke are talking, and I was like, we know Henry's a good player. Like, I think let's go with him on this one. And we thought that Luke's ranking would get them both in. And so they were going to play together, and about a minute and a half before the deadline, another pair signed in that knocked them out. So then Luke ended up having to go and play with somebody else because Henry didn't have a ranking, so Henry couldn't play with anybody in the end. And you always wonder how different things might turn out for the two of them if they had to play that tournament together.
Can you remember who the pair who signed in last minute were?
I can't remember. No, I have no idea. But
that'll be a good one. Anyway,
it was it was a
sliding doors moment.
Yeah.
Well, what an interesting little insight there is. Thanks for your question, avid tennis fan on Twitter, and sorry for not getting back to you last week. If you want to ask a question on Twitter, we are at Unfiltered Tennis. We would be Tennis Unfiltered, but it's too many characters for a Twitter handle, so make of that what you will. Bad planning, I would suggest. It's not the only way you can get in touch. You can also get in touch via email, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. A bit more straightforward that. And that's what Rajan has done, who is one of our Indian listeners. I know we've got quite a lot of listeners in India, so I'm very grateful for your input as always. Lots of very passionate fans in India as well. Most emails from Indian fans start off with a bit of a rant about how we don't like their favourite player enough. But a lot of them also say, but I still like listening, even though you seem to have a go at us. So this is Rajan, big fan from India. Two things you'd like to ask. We might not get on to the second one today, but the first one is about Adrian Mannarino, who beat Jack Draper in the final in Sofia over the weekend. Jack Draper's first ATP Tour final, but he came up again in what might be, as Calvin pointed out on text, one of the biggest discrepancies in ball striking a tennis match has ever seen between Jack Draper and Adrian Mannarino. Rajan asks, what are your thoughts about players like him? He purposely avoids knowing who he is facing. Do you encounter more such players on the tour? Do you think this is a credible strategy? If not, then do you think Adrian Mannarino is a genius for what he does? He does get relatively decent results and was France number one not long ago. Calvin, you spoke to us the other week about scouting reports. Adrian Mannarino wants you to shred them.
The one thing you know about, there are certain players who don't know who they play and don't look at draws. And the way that you'll know if somebody's one of them is because they will always tell you. And it's the same as where they say the vegans, people will always tell you if they're vegan. Players who don't look at draws will always make a point about telling you that you'll go like, I mean, Luke's played with a couple of players who, one in particular, he played with like called Semva Beek, who every single time, so they'd win a match, they'd come off and you go, well done lads, well done, like who have we got next? And Semva got, I don't know who we've got next because I never look at draws. It's like, yes, you told me yesterday after the win. And they'll always make a point of it. I still find it difficult that the draw's right there. Your name's there, and your next opponent is there. Like, how are you not seeing it? Like what are you doing? Like, unless you're just getting somebody to tell you. But
do you think it's a bit of a mental like showboat?
yeah, I don't know if it's a showboat. Like, maybe people, there are people who I've known players who I guess when I was playing, lower level, but I probably got a bit too obsessed with draws. Where you get a bit wrapped up in it. You're going, right, who's in my section here? And again, you always look at like matchups and that kind of thing and go like, there'll be certain players who you don't want to see near you in the draw and that kind of thing. And it might be to do with that, but I don't really get it because once you're in the match, I don't think you're ever thinking like, you're not like, say, 3-3 in the first set and thinking, oh, don't know about that guy I'm playing after this. Like, that doesn't happen. You're thinking about that match. So
it's like that. Do you remember, was it Euro 2016 when Joe Hart is in the tunnel before the Iceland game? I think it's half time. And he's shouting at like his teammates, being like, "We've got to be better than this against France, lads," or whoever it was. I can't remember if it was. France. And it is that kind of looking too far ahead, and so I do kind of get it, George. I mean, yeah, we've both sat in press conferences where Coco Gauff or whoever it is has said, "Oh, I don't look at the draws." Do you believe them?
I do believe there probably are people who don't do it. I also think they're a bit stupid, to be honest. Like, I don't see any possible advantage from not looking at the draw and thinking about who you're playing and kind of getting ready. I get the idea of, okay, maybe not obsessing over it and going too far, but it seems like some players literally just don't want to find out until the morning of the match. I'm not really sure there's great benefit to that, to be honest. But
I mean, as a coach, it's a bit different for a coach, but you kind of have to know as a coach because you're going to want to go and see, even before the match has been played. If the next opponent's playing, I'll go and have a watch. So you can't just never have a look. But I guess it might be different for Manarino because those guys all know each other so well. And what's Manarino going to do differently? He's going to stand at the back and smooth balls really slowly.
That's what I was going to say. Like, and I don't want to do disservice to Adrian Manarino because I think he's won 3 titles this year. But yeah, does he have a plan B? Like, is he not just going to play pretty much one way?
I think think there's something about playing one way, but still having a knowledge of what your opponent does and doesn't like. You know what I mean? And I know as Calvin's saying, most players you do know roughly how they're playing, but I still think even in his case, I can't see the lack of advantage in not watching the guy you're going to play his previous match, see what sort of form they're in, see if anything looks up with them. Like, it's actually, like, to give it a bit of an example, if Manarino turned up and watched, say, Novak, you might think you're going to know exactly what's going on, but Novak in any given match, actually, Novak's probably the worst example I can possibly give here, because I was going to say he might be carrying some sort of injury, but actually we know with Novak that doesn't really make a difference sometimes. But you know what I mean? Like, there might be something you spot that you think, okay, I'm going to be hitting to the backhand all the time because he keeps fiddling around with his left wrist, even if the backhand's normally his kind of stronger shot. I think there would be circumstantial things that it's helpful to know before, I think, even if you're playing in a certain style.
Another thing with these guys will always tell you as well, it's like the dismissiveness whenever you talk about anything else that's going on in the tournament. Like, you'll go like, say player X as the top seed, and you go, geez, player X has gone out. They'll go, oh, right, okay, fair enough. And how are you not interested? It's just not even like about your tournament. It's just an interesting thing that's gone on in the tournament. It's like, I like to not know about anything else that's going on in the draw.
I sometimes think it's a little bit of a sign of some fragility. Like, I think
100%.
It's you're sort of trying to protect yourself from something, but yeah. Rajan's also asked an interesting question about broadcasting, which I think we will come back to, but it's quite a big topic and there's lots else to talk about this week. And we should move on to Vince from Montpellier with a proper meta question. It says, how small is the tennis podcast world? Do you know or fraternize with any other podcasters? I know others make their enmities or affinities known as if they kept bumping into each other on a weekly basis. Can you shed some light on this? Well, I mean, I think one reality is the tennis podcast world isn't very big because, we are, as I regularly tell people, the second biggest tennis podcast in the UK. We're regularly the second biggest in the US, in Australia, and even occasionally number one in those countries. And, you know, we're just three blokes. Like, a lot of the other podcasts are related to broadcasters, you know, whether it's like Amazon in the US or Tennis Channel doing some of their bits and pieces. I think they're like, they obviously have just spin-offs basically. Now the tennis podcast is the biggest podcast in the world, the biggest tennis podcast in the world, I should say. And yeah, like they're at tournaments, I'm at tournaments, Calvin's at tournaments, we bump into them. I've been to golf days with David and Matt. I did a radio show with Catherine not that long ago. So yeah, I mean, I Calvin, I know you've had run-ins with tennis podcasts on Twitter, but there aren't many people left you've not had run-ins on Twitter with. So in fairness, that puts them in the majority.
Yeah, in answer to the question, James is mates with them all, and they avoid me like the plague.
I've also been to dinner with them all as well back in the day.
And George, didn't you go to a film premiere with the Game to Love podcast guys?
Yes, yeah, I met a few kind of through that, but I'd say, you know, David, Catherine, and Matt, whoever of us was or is on the tour, you'd see them at everything because they've got heavy funding. Whereas the reality is, a lot of other podcasts, unless, as James says, they're a degree of a spin-off of people who are already on the tour, which we sort of are.
Well, in fairness, that's actually kind of still the tennis podcast case. You know, Catherine obviously works pretty much full time for Amazon, so she's on the tour kind of because of that. David works for the BBC. Matt is kind of the only. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. This is all public information. It's just like betraying some confidence here. No, like Matt obviously is a full time employee, sort of. I suspect he's a contractor, but so. Like even that, which is the most successful tennis podcast, that is still kind of subsidized by the broadcasters, if you like. Yeah.
I mean, the only other one, Dan Kiernan from the Soto podcast is obviously a good friend of mine. So we don't really ever talk podcast, but he's a friend of mine from years ago before anyone had any idea what a podcast was. He's just a tennis coach. So I'd say that's the only person I know who does another tennis podcast.
If you do want us to see the tennis podcast more, you should donate £2,000 to us so a dog sponsor our podcast.
Yeah, the crowdfunding is, I mean, fair play. Like they've done an amazing job with that. Like spectacular stuff. I hope that answers your question, Vince. You've been in touch before, I'm pretty sure, so thanks very much for your correspondence. Colm, I hope I've pronounced that right, on email, says, I was just reading about British tennis player Billy Harris, who won his first match on tour this week. Yeah, he beat Marc-André Hussler in Sofia, I think, didn't he? Sounds a really interesting story from the lower reaches of the tennis tour and shows the sacrifice and toil involved for often scant reward. Over to our sacrifice, toil, and scant reward correspondent, Calvin Betton, I reckon. Calvin, Billy Harris, you must know him. You must have known him for a while, I reckon.
Yeah, I've known Billy for a long time, yeah. Yeah, he's doing well. It's good to see him doing well now. He's toiled for a long time. Famously, he lived in a transit van and travelled around Europe in that.
I only know one other person who used to do that, and it's Tamara Korpach. But presumably it's not a common thing for people to do.
No, it's not a common thing. I've known the odd player who's had a camper van who's gone and done that. Dustin Brown used to do that. There was a British tennis player whose name escapes me back in the 90s who famously used to do it. But Billy, I've seen him at the NTC at times. I've known him just go out to I've been staying at the NTC and Billy's staying in the car park in his van. But he got a sponsor a few years back who's helped him out financially. And I mean, he's just a warrior of the tour. You know, he battles, he brings his game, he knows what his game is, and he's going to battle. And he after COVID, when UK Pro League came in, which helped a lot of players out, to be fair, it was a 6-week. There were 6 separate events and then a Masters at the end of it. So, but each week went on for 7 days. So it started on Monday and finished on the Sunday and then started again. They were all at St George's Hill in South London, the tournaments, and Billie was the only player who played every single day. They played a tennis match for 49 days in a row on the same court. There's only one court that they did it on. There was one court for men, one for women. And it was just, and because we forget now what COVID was like. There was no clubhouse or anything. You had to turn up. There was a little marquee set up for the players outside, and I think Billie had an Airbnb just round the corner for 7 weeks and played for 49 days in a row. Some of the games were pretty ugly, and some of them were good. I know in the first week there, he played Luke twice. He played Luke once in the groups and once in the semis, and they won one each, and both of them were 12-10 in the final set tiebreak. And there were some matches you watch Billie and you think he's flagging here, and then there'd be somewhere he played like he had he'd had a week off. But and that's the kind of thing he'll do. He plays most weeks, travels around with his dad now, who's a great bloke. And yeah, it's just a good story. He just keeps winning. It shows that he's 28 now, I think Billie is, and bear in mind that he's at his career high ranking. He's 28, and he'd be well past the age of eligibility for any sort of funding from the LTA. And it just shows that there is no blueprint. There's no sign of things to follow on the tennis tour. Players reach their potential at different stages. Like in anything in life, there is no blueprint for how to be successful, as much as some people try and sell it that there is.
I guess, also, it is a great story, and there are some unique elements to it. But and Calvin, I remember when Breakpoint first came out, and we were saying you could make such a great documentary about this segment of the tour. 200, 300. I guess stories like Billie's are kind of 10 to a penny down there, right?
I mean, it's unique, but there's loads of unique stories there. That for me would have been, if they wanted to do a proper tennis documentary, would have been doing the Challenger Tour, the Futures and the Challenger Tour, because that's where the stories are. The players would have been the stories about, because most they've had to really come through. They don't have the help of agents and that kind of thing to get them where they're going. And agents can't win you tennis matches, but they can put you in the tennis tournament and
get you a wild card,
and that kind of thing. Whereas, and they'll put you in the best hotels and that kind of thing. Like, you're not doing 6 weeks in a row in a 10 euro a night apartment in Heraklion in Greece. If you're backed by IMG, you're in the main hotel, 200 quid a night.
Yeah.
But that is a great show that will probably never get made, because we're messing around with Breakpoint, which, let's have it right, is absolutely rubbish.
I was just sort of casually skating through the rankings and looking for other people who are over the age of 25 and at a career high, like Oriol Roca Batalla, for it just to pull one person out. He won his first Futures title in 2013. He has won 27 Futures titles in total, and in September he won his first ever Challenger title and is now at a career high of 190. You telling me that guy doesn't have a hell of a story, and hasn't seen some things and just found a way.
And stories to tell, but I think what's also where the stories come from in that kind of thing as well is just the players just spend more time with each other. As you get, you kind of have to. You're all in, you're all in the apartments, you're all in the cheaper hotels, and you get word that there's a decent restaurant somewhere where, it's relatively cheap. You're always going to go there. So the stories come out there. That's where the stories lie, not Francis Tiafoe ordering Deliveroo for the 9th night in a row.
Yeah, they're more involved in the real world.
I'd say, even as a more print-based journalist, one of the best weeks I had for some great stories and gossip and seeing things on the tour was the Challenger, rather than going to.
Is that when you went to Muratoglu?
Yeah, it was brilliant. That was a great week. I learned, some things I can't say on here, some things I can, but it was just fun, and it was interesting to get a bit of a perspective, because at the time there was a lot of interesting kind of tennis politics and the sort of early formulations of kind of the PTPA, and just had people really with completely different end perspectives just sitting around the bar slagging them off. It was like, great, this is fun.
Some of the stories from the Challenger Tour are beyond belief. Like there was it doesn't happen anymore, but up until about, I'm going to say about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a challenger tournament in the Ukraine, which may or may not have been financed by a few men who owned several brothels. And I'll leave that one there.
I can only imagine what the media day was like, or
And-
where it was held.
And also, I'll note that if you now go back and find it, and you can find it, the entry list was exceptionally high for a challenger at that tournament.
The cutoff was 25.
The cutoff was well inside 100 for a challenger.
I have like there is a strangely high number of stories I know linked to the tennis tour that are linked to ladies of the night, which I don't know if that's the same in all sports, but there's
World's oldest profession. Right, let's swiftly move on before we get ourselves in any more trouble than we absolutely need to. We should talk Billie Jean King Cup, and conveniently, someone has emailed in a question about Billie Jean King Cup. It's quite involved, so bear with me, but PD on email has got a lot to say, and I'm all for it. PD says, I have a question for this week's podcast regarding recent BJK Cup final between Canada and Italy. Prior to the final, there appeared to be widespread expectation that Eugenie Bouchard would be selected for singles over Marina Stakusic. I find this opinion to be unsubstantiated for the following reasons. One, I love this so much. Jeannie has played fewer singles matches than Marina this year, despite the latter just returning from injury in June. From a technical standpoint, Marina has consistently demonstrated the ability to keep pace with someone like Trevisan, whose effective yet slower topspin shots are effectively countered by... Honestly, PD, you might be on this podcast in a minute. Effectively countered by Marina's superior movement and strategic build-up plays, facilitating the execution of winning shots, whereas the alternatives, Marina and Bouchard, simply lack the baseline intensity. Opting for such a switch would be akin to benching an informed Lucas Moura for a rusty Harry Kane in the Champions League final. Ultimately, Heidi chose Marina, and huge respect to her for calling up and entrusting the 18-year-old, a decision that proved surprisingly successful throughout the tournament, but I'm curious to hear your insights on this matter. I actually did notice this decision I was at the Billie Jean King Cup final qualifier, or whatever they call it. Britain beat Sweden. And I did notice 18-year-old Marina Stakusic going 3-1 in singles, I think, as Canada's number 2 singles player on the way to the title, of course. I think it might be a little bit more simple than PD is making it, isn't it? How many singles matches has Eugenie Bouchard played in the last 5 years?
From what I know, I mean, she's played quite a bit. She hasn't won many. But from what I know and what I'm told, that Eugenie Bouchard was left, I think she was left out of the squad for a while. One, because she's been crap for some time, and two, she doesn't prescribe to the idea of it being a team game, to be pleasant with it, and she doesn't hide that. And when she was selected to come back into the squad, I'm told that she didn't do anything to remedy that. She immediately went in and claiming that she should play, and that all the other players were pretty crap, and she was better than them. And the fact that they won, I think, was down to all the other girls getting on really well, and nothing much to do with Eugenie Bouchard, who isn't very well liked on the tennis tour or within her own team.
Is she any more popular on the pickleball tour, where she's also a professional? That was my main confusion. I was baffled to see her playing, given that she's also now a professional pickleballer. But
I mean, I don't know her at all, but you'd have to go some way to find many people who've got many nice things to say about Eugenie Bouchard.
Well, she didn't play a live rubber in the whole thing. She played two doubles. Sorry.
You'd have to go even further to find anything nice that she says about many other people as well.
She played 2 dead doubles rubbers and did win them both, but didn't play any singles.
Slightly off topic from the question, which I think, I think the question itself is...
George, I was using the question to get us on topic, and you're dragging us back off.
It is within the topic.
Right, okay.
But just not directly answering the question. I mean...
Consider yourself yellow carded, George.
Yeah, that's fine. I suspect some people who are listening to this might want to show me a red card in a second, but I couldn't really. I don't want to diminish Canada winning this thing.
Oh no.
But I couldn't really believe that in a final of, quite a big, or what we want to be a big, prestigious tournament, is being won by that team. And to be frank, is there any other team competition in the world that would try and call itself the World Cup of Tennis that would actively stop its best players getting to that event by putting conflicting things? I think it's really let down women's tennis. And while it's good for Canada that they've won both the men's and women's singles title, are you seriously telling me that team beats some of those teams that should have been there? Just don't buy it. And that's disappointing to kind of have as an undertone going into a competition like this.
Yeah, I was hoping we get some positive notes out of this, but I appreciate that it's difficult. There were, I think, 4 top 20 singles players playing the event. Vondrousova, I should say, Garcia, Rybakina, and Bencic, who are 4, 7, 17, and 20. That's a pretty disappointing turnout. We know the reasons, quite apart from the fact it's the end of the season, everyone's knackered. But there was decent prize money on offer. It was equal prize money with Davis Cup finals, and it's big money. I think it was 2.2 million for the winning team. So there's no reason for them not to. I genuinely think that shows you how difficult it was to contemplate going from WTA Finals to Billie Jean King Cup Finals, which I know a couple of the doubles players did. Ellen Perez, as we reported last week, was desperately asking for a private jet or some sort of help to get across the Atlantic. Storm Hunter, who's the world number 1 doubles player, did and also played singles, and she didn't play the first match, and Australia were shocked by Slovenia or Slovakia. Slovenia, partly because maybe Storm Hunter didn't play singles. Isla Tomljanovic is still very much coming back from injury, so not great from that perspective. But George, to drag you into something positive, Leylah Fernandez is this is her biggest win since, as was mentioned on Sunday, i.e. the US Open final that she lost to Emma Raducanu. And for an end of the year for her, by the way, she won the first title she's ever won outside of Mexico. And then she's basically single-handedly dragged Canada to victory in this, because she was, whenever there was a live doubles match, she was playing singles and doubles. She beat the Wimbledon champion in the semi-final. She beat Jasmine Paolini, which maybe is less of an achievement, in the final. I think we should be talking about this as a triumph. Look, Canada have now won the Davis Cup and the Billie Jean King Cup in the space of 11 months.
Yeah, it's not to take something away from them. Obviously, the undertone is taking something slightly away from them, but you've still got to beat what's in front of you and go out and do it. And, the second seed player, you wouldn't have had her down to win many of those matches, kind of looking ahead at the tournament, even if it's not the best players in the world. She's done absolutely fantastically well to go out there and win it. And, but we've had this with Fernandez a few times, haven't we? Kind of false dawns where we're starting to think she's going to be a consistent good player at the top end of the tour, and it's not quite happened that way. So, hopefully this is the result that can kick that on. But I think we've all grown slightly tired of using that phrase in women's tennis and thinking there is going to be some massive change in a player we would like it to kind of happen to.
Yeah, agreed. Ben Lewis is coming on next week, because George is going to, I think I mentioned, George is going to Thailand for an indeterminate amount of time. Several weeks.
Yeah, he'll have a much more positive spin on it than I have. He's a nice guy, Ben. But... Yeah,
Ben Lewis from Matchpoint Canada is going to come on and be George Bellshaw for a week next week to help us preview Davis Cup finals, which I'm going to be heading out to in Malaga. I don't know if there's anything else we want to say we should talk about Billie Jean King Cup here in the UK, because Britain almost cocked up the dream draw where they got a home tie against Sweden, whose top 2 singles players were both injured or unavailable, a combination of the two. Although I think there's some subcurrent there that Johanna Larsson, the Swedish captain, was sort of half alluding to at times. But anyway, that's probably a bit too niche even for me. But Jodie Burrage did make her Billie Jean King Cup debut, and frankly, in the words of Anki Othbong, didn't cope with the occasion. and lost a match that by ranking she really should have won. And then Katie Boulter, 2 wins, Harriet Dart, the win to seal it. I mean, George, you've been to some of these ties, like, when Britain were stuck in that Europe-Africa subgroup.
That was one of my favourite weeks of tennis, I think I went to, James. I had a great time in Bath. It was wonderful.
But that was a big deal, right? Because it was the first one on home soil for goodness knows how long.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's it's been a funny old slog for Britain in this competition over the last kind of 10, 15 years, and I don't know. I mean, actually, going back to the original question that brought us on to Billie Jean King Cup, Burrage is, I suppose, the counter argument in some ways, in that you're thinking, okay, she has been in good form compared to maybe some of the other players, but it's like the Harry Kane versus Lucas Moura thing is, would you leave Harry Kane out of a big match if he's available, even if he's not been playing that well? I mean, you just wouldn't, would you? You'd be off your head. I'm not saying
we're going for a bit of a stretch here, calling Harriet Dart the Harry Kane of women's tennis.
I'm not at all saying that. Lucas Moura is not a bad example at the other end, but I'm just saying there is something about putting yourself in an environment that maybe you're not quite as used to, and it can go wrong. And Dart has played a lot of big matches before. I thought it was a bit. I haven't seen the full press conference, but I thought the quote from Anne was a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily handle the occasion.
I think it was
like
pretty
thrown under the bus a bit.
Well, I also this time last year, Jodie Burrage was not picked for the Billie Jean King Cup team, despite being the form player, frankly, in British tennis, and was, I think, quite rightly furious about it. And she's now been given a chance, and George and Calvin, Anne very well, and often publicly she tries to be restrained, but privately she does not mince her words, and at times that can break through. I think she sometimes feels she has this role to be a bit of a diplomat publicly, but she has strong opinions on things. I mean, she was very strong on the WTA Finals when we asked her about that on Friday, and how much of a disgrace that was in the way it was organised. And I yes, maybe it was a bit harsh to come out and say it, but you can't avoid it, and I suspect that Jodie would have taken ownership of that privately and said, yeah, fair enough, I bottled it, quite frankly, because she was 4-love up against a girl ranked outside top 3, a woman ranked outside top 350 in the world, who had never played in front of 5,500 people on home soil. That's a bottle by anyone's measure. So I don't think you can really criticise Ankie Othwong for calling a spade a spade.
I don't know about that. I mean, Anne's a friend of mine. I like Jodie. Well, a coach, Craig Veal's a good friend of mine. So it's not like I have any skin in the game in this one. But people can lose tennis matches. You can just lose. Sometimes you don't play well. Sometimes you get a bit tight when, as we've discussed before, Jim Courier always says, getting nervous, there's no experience for nerves. It's sometimes you can be the most experienced player. Roger Federer bottled a Wimbledon final, the last one he played, bottled a match point. It just happens sometimes. Or sometimes you can just lose tennis matches. I don't know how helpful it is, because like you say, I think that Jodie would already have known that as a player. Then I think you absolutely know that I've played crap there. I should have won that. I don't really know what the benefit of coming out and saying it was from Anne's point of view, other than to maybe vindicate herself on what she thinks that she'd made the right decision last year. But I don't know if that really is what the job's there for. And she might need Jodie Burrage again, because Jodie Burrage overall is playing better tennis than Harriet Dart is. And, you could argue that, well, she's still British number one. No, Katie's British number one, isn't she? But she's the second best British player. Anne knows the job better than I do. She does it. She probably knows women's tennis better than I do, but I wouldn't be isolating my second best player. I know that, because what you're going to do if Harriet Dart gets injured a lot, what you're going to do if Harriet Dart can't play the next match, you're going to play Heather Watson.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I also wanted to note that the junior Billie Jean King Cup finals were this week, and the British team...
Can I just say something else on that, James? Sorry. I'd also say in Jodie's defence, Jodie's played some serious tennis this year at big tournaments. She won match. She's won a match at the US Open, which is a bigger occasion than playing the Copper Box against Sweden.
It is, but it is a different dynamic. Like going out and playing.
But it's a different dynamic, James. But what I'm saying is that it's not like she has a. It's not like you can go out and go. She just doesn't handle big situations well. She's a good player who's got inside the top 100 on merit. It's not been handed to her or anything. She's beaten good players at good tournaments to get there, and I'd just be wary for saying that right. That's that done. We've seen it before. We've seen it with football managers who just don't trust certain players that they've got, and it never tends to work out all that well. And like I say, I wouldn't be writing off Jodie Burrage at the age that she is and at the level that she plays at this stage. She's a very good tennis player, and I think that she will win tennis matches for Great Britain in the future. And let's be honest as well, this is hardly like a hugely successful Fed Cup team. They tend to beat the crap teams.
Yeah.
And they tend to lose to the teams who are not crap. And a lot of nonsense goes on around that Fed Cup team. And like I've said many times before, I like the people involved. Anne's a friend of mine. Ian Bates, I get on very well with him. He's a friend of mine as well. All the girls involved are very good. But there's a bit of a notion to try and sell that team as way better than it has been. It hasn't won many tennis matches, many Billie Jean King Cup or Fed Cup matches. And they have a real habit of losing matches and selling them as success. And then I think it's a bit poor for everyone involved if one player loses and we're going to sell it as a major failure when we've made basically 5 years of selling failure as a success.
It's a good point.
As Bob Dylan said, failure is no success at all.
Indeed. It's actually someone leant over to me and said, crikey, Katie Bolter's got a good record for GB, and I think she's 12-3 in singles matches. And I went back through it, and I don't think she has maybe once or twice beaten a player ranked higher than her in those matches. And that's not to discredit her. I'm just saying, sort of similar to you, Calvin. They haven't won many tennis matches, and the ones they haven't always been the big ones, George.
The one other, one of the slight defence I would have on kind of Anne's side on the kind of the record and selling failure, she's not had many times over the last 6 or 7 years where she's been able to put out a best player, has she? And that's eternally frustrating, I'm sure, as a coach of these conversations. Comparing it to the men's side where you've had Andy Murray turn out every single time for about 10 years, giving it his all, confident, get out as much as she could or should have done. Raducanu hasn't got out as much as she could or couldn't done. We're talking about Bolter there. Bolter as a number 2, I think is quite an attractive number 2 for Britain to have, considering you've just seen in the actual big tournament finals what were the rankings of the number 2 players there. Katie Bolter would give those players a good bloody match. It's the number 1 that's really let us down on the women's side for the last 6 or 7 years, putting it bluntly.
I'll stress there, though, George, that I'm not criticising the team's results at all. I don't think they've underperformed or anything. I think they've kind of par performed. I think they've beaten the teams you would expect them to beat, and they've lost to the teams that you wouldn't. But I think that, and I don't include Anne in this, I don't think Anne does this particularly, but I think the players and particularly the social media team around the LTA have really sold it as being more successful than it is, and making out that Jodie's coming in and dropping a bollock is it's a bit disingenuous, I think, because they've pretty much all lost tennis matches. I mean, I remember Harriet Dart lost one a few years back when she got absolutely hammered by one of the players on a clay court somewhere, I think.
Does happen.
Yeah, players lose tennis matches.
Yeah. Britain will go into a qualifier in spring next year. If they win that, then they'll be into the Billie Jean King Cup finals in 2024, which would be quite an achievement. Emma Raducanu may well play that, which would obviously give them a pretty massive boost. Maya Lumsden is the number 1 doubles player, and she was in the squad for the first time. Isabel Lacey was also there this weekend, who is now aged out of Billie Jean King Cup juniors, although she will play another year of juniors. And Anne Kjotevong was very keen to point this out, and maybe she's right to do so. But she is part of what looks to be a little bit of a decent crop of young British players on the women's side who came third in the junior Billie Jean King Cup finals this week, beating Spain in the third place playoff. Team run by Katie O'Brien. I think it was Mimi Zhu, Hannah Klugman, and one other player whose name has completely escaped me. But Hannah Klugman in particular, I know a lot of people are quite excited about. She's only 14, she's about 10, 15 by now, and has been tearing up trees a little bit on the ITF Challenger Tour in the limited number of matches she's allowed to play, Calvin.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to sound like a downer on this one, but I'll say the same again. They beat all the teams you would expect them to beat. And
Spain on a clay court?
Spain don't really play juniors that much, though, James. Like, you don't want to overread into that. Like, they don't... the Spanish junior setup is very unique in that you don't get... Like, you look at... Like, Alcaraz barely played any juniors. Nadal played basically no juniors. Ferrero, basically the same. They tend not to play it. The girls, I don't know, maybe a little bit different, but when you look in, and Britain have a very good team. Like Hannah Klugman is an exceptional generational talent, in my opinion. Ming Zhu is a good player at that level as well. I think going over there, and again, I think they kind of beat the teams who you would think they would beat. Czech are a very good team. They lost to the Czech Republic. I think we just always should be careful of these sort of things and overselling it as to what it was.